The story you're about to hear was never meant to be told. I almost didn't record it, but some things refuse to stay quiet. So here it is, listen at your own risk. The party with the green marks. I wasn't very social in college. I didn't get good grades. I wasn't in a frat. I didn't have a girlfriend, and I wasn't very involved in anything. I wasn't a very happy kid. I'm not complaining, though. I found a loyal girl who would never stop fighting for me in my late 30s, and my life is good now. We live together with 2 cats named Blue and Raz, and I'm planning on proposing soon. Like I was saying, I wasn't into frats. So generic frat parties were off the table for me, but I still wanted to have fun. Who wouldn't? My friends Bryson and Ian were in the same boat, and we spent most weekends killing time in Bryson's dorm. That being said, we took every chance we got when it came to parties. Most of the parties we were lucky enough to go to were off campus, meaning they weren't associated with any of the frats or the school itself. One time we actually drove over an hour just to go to a party. It's safe to say we were pretty desperate. One Friday afternoon, Ian texted the group chat saying the girl he was talking to knew of a party not far away. Ian tended to attract the strangest girls, you know the ones I'm talking about. Bryson joked that he didn't want to go to some death metal, emo anime party, which I kind of agreed with. Ian was adamant though and convinced us this would be a normal party. It's not like we had anything better going on. Bryson convinced his brother Chris to be our designated driver. Chris didn't drink anyway and said he'd be down for a party, so everything was looking good. As we were driving to the party, Ian started complaining about the girl he was talking to. He said she hadn't answered him in hours, which honestly wasn't surprising considering the kind of guy Ian was. He was torn and said he was having second thoughts about even going, which seemed like an overreaction. We were already 30 minutes deep, so we weren't about to turn around. We told him to suck it up and not let it ruin the night. A few minutes later, Ian said Callista's profile disappeared from his phone altogether. We broke it to him that he had been blocked and she probably decided to go to the party with someone else. He pouted for the rest of the drive. When we reached the party, we instantly knew we'd made the right choice. The house was massive compared to the rest on the block. Ian didn't want to go in yet, saying he needed a buzz to take his mind off the situation. Bryson and I didn't object to drinking, so we told Chris to park farther down the street so we could pre-game outside the car. We killed a few of the beers we brought and watched people enter the house in droves. It honestly looked like a pretty lit party. Once Ian was satisfied with his buzz, the 4 of us made our way to the house. As soon as we stepped inside, I could tell something was off. All the lights were on, no ambient lighting. Just bright overhead lights you'd expect to be off at a college party. Most of the people were very nicely dressed, nothing like what you'd expect at a rowdy party. The scene looked more like a fancy dinner party. But maybe that's what it was. We didn't really have any details about what we were walking into. We didn't look too out of place, but the clothing differences were noticeable. The music was bizarre. Not trap, not hip-hop. None of the usual stuff. It was some kind of ethereal, almost druggy music with no words, just instruments. It wasn't bad, just odd. My friends and I looked at each other, trying to make sense of what was going on. We grilled Ian for details, but he said he was as clueless as we were. We walked around, exploring the house. There was alcohol everywhere, so we helped ourselves. A few minutes in, I noticed people catching my eye and immediately looking away. It was so apparent I wondered if something was in my teeth. I figured they were staring because of what I was wearing, which made sense. The 4 of us were having a good time despite the weird atmosphere. Actually, I take that back. Chris was pretty bored and said he was going to go smoke in his car, which we figured was because he didn't have a drop of alcohol in him. A few minutes after he left, a group of girls approached us. We definitely weren't super confident, so getting approached was a new thing. The 3 of them started flirting with us almost immediately, not even subtly. They joked about an entrance fee, which I thought was funny until I realized they were serious. They were holding a bottle of tequila, which we definitely weren't going to turn down. So without much thought and not wanting to seem uncool, We swigged the bottle. After that, the six of us stuck together, drinking, talking, and occasionally dancing, and things were going really well. At one point, I noticed a weird mark on Tina's neck, a short but solid green line that looked like it had been drawn on with a Sharpie. It was thin, and I probably wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't been standing so close to her. I debated asking her about it, but decided not to risk offending her. Maybe it was a birthmark or something, but once I'd noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. It looked so unnatural, green of all colors. Who wears green makeup? It couldn't have been a smear. I let it go and kept flirting with her, wondering where things would end up. Eventually, I saw Bryson and the girl he was with wander upstairs, which I was happy for, and soon after that, Ian and his girl also walked toward the stairs. I was nervous to say anything suggestive to Tina because I didn't want to ruin the moment. Even with the alcohol, I felt myself getting anxious and sweaty, so I told her I was going to the bathroom and would be right back. The only bathroom I could find was occupied, so I waited. Eventually, the door opened and a really tall, older-looking guy in a white button-down and linen pants stepped out. I rushed in, bumping into him. I turned around, expecting an apology, but he just stared at me with a blank look, sizing me up. I was about to say something when I saw the same green line on his neck, identical to Tina's. Against my better judgment, I asked him what his problem was. He smirked and shook his head before saying, "Who invited you?" Not knowing how to respond, I blurted out, "Callista," the girl who had stood up Ian. He chuckled and looked up, like he knew exactly who I meant, then stared back at me, expression gone cold. In a low voice, he repeated her name and gestured around the party. "Do you see Callista here?" I had no idea what to say, so I slammed the door on him, wondering what the hell had just happened. I couldn't stop thinking about that green mark or what he said. Part of me regretted not asking him more. When I left the bathroom, I looked for him, but instead kept passing people who eyed me like I didn't belong. I didn't care. I just needed to find my friends and get us out. As I wandered, I kept scanning people's necks, trying to see if anyone else had that mark. To my horror, I saw two more people with identical green lines, same color, length, thickness, everything. It freaked me out. I kept looking for that guy while analyzing everyone's necks. Most people weren't marked, but I kept catching glimpses of more green lines. I started to panic and headed to the stairs to find my friends. Thankfully, as I went up, Bryson and Ian were coming down. I urged them to follow me into an empty hallway so we could talk. I quickly told them my theory and said we had to leave immediately, but they burst out laughing and told me I was drunk. Bryson accused me of being jealous because they had hooked up and I hadn't. I asked where his girl had gone, and he said she told him to meet her upstairs in 20 minutes. Ian said his girl told him the same. There was no reasoning with them. They were riding the aftermath of a hookup. I told them to follow me so I could prove the marks were real, but they refused. Just when I was about to give up, Ian turned his head, and what I saw horrified me. A thin line on his neck, only this one was red, not green. I practically screamed at him, which finally got their attention. I checked Bryson's neck, and he had a red line too. Ian told me to relax, saying it was probably a makeup stain, but Bryson started believing me. I told them we were leaving, and Bryson and I headed for the door. Ian still wouldn't go, insisting he needed to meet up with the girl. Just then, a random guy walked past, eyeing each of us individually, pausing long enough for us to notice the green line on his neck. That was it. Bryson and I bolted for the door with Ian close behind. It felt like everyone was staring at us as we left, but no one tried to stop us. We ran to Chris' car and told him to drive. As we pulled away, both Ian's and Bryson's phones started blowing up. The girls were asking why we had left. How could they have known? They weren't even around to see us go. My friends blocked the girls. Everyone I tell this story to has their own crazy theory about what happened that night. I really don't know what to think, but I do know I don't want to imagine what might have happened if that guy hadn't tipped me off. The stolen backpack. I'm I'm a graduate student studying civil engineering at Purdue University. I started a few months ago and was in a good place, all things considered. Classes were going well. I made a couple of friends, and my apartment was decently priced, even though the landlord was sketchy. I had a car and lived pretty far from campus, but I liked driving. The only downside was that it was a sketchy part of town, but I didn't care much. I'm a guy in my mid-20s, so I figured I could handle myself. Things were a little boring, but I was there for a degree, not to party. Everything was normal until the day my backpack got stolen. I had left it on a table in a random lecture hall to go to the bathroom like an idiot, and by the time I got back it was gone. Of course, that hall didn't have cameras, so there was nothing I could do. I was more annoyed than anything. My wallet, keys, and laptop were in there. I had to cancel my cards, get new ones, report my keys missing to the landlord, and look for a replacement laptop. It sucked, but things happened. A few days later, I realized the situation was 1,000 times worse than I thought. I drove home one evening and found a handwritten note slipped under my door. I figured it was from the landlord, but I was dead wrong. It said, "I see you." No name, no signature, just those 3 words. I instantly put 2 and 2 together. Whoever stole my backpack had gone through my laptop and figured out where I lived. That was terrifying enough, but then I had a much worse thought. They had my apartment keys. My skin started to crawl, and I looked over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be there. I ran inside and slammed the door, locking the deadbolt so no one could get in. Over the next week, I got more handwritten notes. They weren't long, just strange phrases like, "I know what you did," or "watch yourself." It was really starting to freak me out. I had never done anything wrong, but if someone went through my laptop, who knows what they could have found or twisted. I didn't know what to do. Would the police even help? I told myself I'd wait it out and hope the person got bored. One night, while getting ready for bed, I noticed something. It was dark outside and my blinds were half closed, but I could have sworn I saw a flash, like someone took a picture of me. I yanked the blinds shut, heart racing. No one was there. Then I started noticing small things around my apartment being moved. At first I thought I was just being careless, my shoes in a different spot, my coat draped over a chair instead of hung up. Little things I could explain away if I tried. But then one day I came home to find my bed sheets stripped off and my room completely torn apart. Drawers pulled out, books scattered across the floor. It looked like someone had gone through everything. I called the cops, but they didn't do much. No forced entry, nothing stolen. So apparently there was nothing they could do. I asked my landlord to change the locks, but he said it would take 2 days to get someone out. I begged him to do it sooner, but he shrugged and said it wasn't an emergency. I felt betrayed. How could he not think this was an emergency? I kept pressuring him, but he eventually stopped answering me. That was literally yesterday. I barely slept last night, even with the deadbolt locked. I'm thinking of changing the locks myself, but I'm not sure how without causing expensive damage. I called out of all my classes this morning because I'm afraid to leave. I'm still here, writing all of this down. I'm prepared to confront whoever it is if they come back. If they went through my laptop, they'd know my class schedule. Maybe I'll hide somewhere and get the jump on them if they try to enter while I'm supposed to be at class. I think that's what I'm going to do. I'll give an update when I can. The Hacked Project. I've been having an ongoing issue that I can't keep to myself anymore. I had just broken up with my boyfriend of 2 years, Ben. It wasn't a bad breakup, but it wasn't great either. We'd been arguing for months, and it was obvious things weren't going to work out. When we finally ended things, I thought it was for the best. I blocked him on everything, and that was that. I go to Temple University, and I live in a small apartment near campus, on the 2nd floor of an older building, which means I can hear pretty much everything going on outside. A few days after the breakup, I started hearing strange noises at night, not regular city sounds, but footsteps, quiet shuffling, like someone was just outside my window. At first, I figured it was my mind playing tricks on me, but eventually I realized it was probably my ex. The reason I wasn't freaking out was because Ben was one of the sweetest and most harmless guys. He'd never do anything drastic or hurt me. I figured he just missed me, so I decided to let it go. Eventually, he'd get bored. Plus, I was already stressed from the breakup, and I had this huge group project due. That project is actually a huge component of this story. I was the one responsible for editing the project and sending it to our professor. I worked on it all night, making sure everything was perfect, and I emailed it just before midnight. Relieved to have it done, I went to bed, trying not to think about everything else going wrong in my life. The next day in class, we were supposed to present the video. My professor plugged in his laptop and pulled up the file I'd sent. I was nervous, but also a little proud. I had a lot of experience with Adobe products, and I knew our video was probably a cut above everyone else's. Then, the video started playing, and my stomach dropped. It wasn't our project. Instead, there was a grainy video of someone wearing a scream mask. The person wasn't just sitting there, they were talking, saying horrible things about me, my professor, the government. It was disgusting. I don't even want to repeat what was said. My professor let the video play a little longer than he should have, probably because he was in shock too. When he finally paused it, his face was pale. I was frozen. I have never been so mortified in my life. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. I could barely breathe. I felt hundreds of eyes on me. The rest of the class was staring, and I knew what they were thinking. After the most painful seconds of my life, I snapped out of my humiliation, burst into tears, and ran out of the lecture hall. I felt a panic attack coming. I debated going home, but I knew I'd get expelled if I just disappeared. Reluctantly, I waited outside for class to end before approaching my professor. I pleaded with him that I had no idea what happened, and that I was positive I had sent the right video. He agreed to hear me out and confirmed that 2 videos had been sent. The first one was my project, and the more recent one was the one he played in class. Clearing things up with the university took a lot of time and hassle, but I was eventually able to do it, and I won't bore you with the details. Nothing was going to erase the humiliation, though, and it was also clear that my email had been hacked, which was a much bigger problem. I changed my password and thought I had just gotten super unlucky, but that's when things got worse. Not 1 week later, I woke up to being logged out of Snapchat, and that only happens when someone else logs in, which meant I had gotten hacked there too. I don't even want to think about what they found. There was a lot of stuff on my Snapchat I don't feel comfortable talking about. I called the police, told them everything, and to my surprise, Ben agreed to let them question him. The police were able to confirm that Ben wasn't behind any of it. He did, however, admit that he posted my private information on some online forum right after we broke up. He swore he never posted any of my passwords, but my passwords were easy to guess, and like an idiot, I used the same password for everything. The police told me there wasn't much they could do because Ben wasn't responsible for the hacking, and that's when the full gravity of the situation hit me. Someone else had basically all of my private information, and they could probably blackmail me. I changed my passwords immediately, but it might have been too late by then. A few weeks went by and nothing happened. My best guess is that whoever was tormenting me realized I had gotten the police involved and didn't want to risk being caught. I thought that was the end of it, but of course, it wasn't. One day, some random person added me on Snapchat, which wasn't too unusual. But when I added them back, they started sending me pictures of me, and I'm sure you can guess the types of things they were sending. I blocked them before they could threaten me, which I'm sure they were about to do, and I burst into tears because I've never felt more helpless in my life. For about a week, random profiles would add me on Snapchat. I knew it was the same person, and I never accepted their ads out of fear that they would blackmail me or ask for money. This has been ongoing for about a week now, and I don't know what to do. There's literally no evidence or any way I can track this person. The police don't have enough information to get involved, and it's not like they could do anything anyway. And the worst part is they literally know my address and whatever else about my personal life. I don't know if this will ever end. The yearbook signature. This happened a couple of years ago, right before school ended. It was the last day of 8th grade, exactly what you'd expect on the final day of middle school excitement and bittersweet goodbyes. Everyone was running around, scribbling signatures and cheesy messages in each other's yearbooks. My middle school was huge, easily over 1,000 students, so to keep things manageable, the teachers collected our yearbooks and passed them around to different classrooms, making sure everyone who wanted to got a chance to sign. I'm sure you can see how that could create problems. Anyone who wanted to could write whatever they wanted in anyone's yearbook. The teachers tried their best to prevent things from getting out of hand, but I knew a few kids who wrote some mean messages to people they didn't like. At the end of the day, when I got my yearbook back, I flipped through the pages eagerly, reading all the goofy notes from my friends. But as I scanned the pages, something caught my eye. There was a signature below the face of someone I had never seen before, and his name was Samuel Robinson III, a name I'm going to remember for as long as I live. The message he wrote was short, simple, and honestly a bit unsettling. It read, "Hags, he'll be seeing you again." I stared at the page, confused out of my mind. I'd never even spoken a single word to this Samuel kid. It wasn't like there was anything I could do about it, thought. The school year was over, so I couldn't see him, even if I wanted to. I just chalked it up to some weird kid being weird, or maybe an honest mistake. Either way, I stopped thinking about it. A few hours passed, and before I knew it, I was at home hosting a sleepover in my basement with my best friends Kevin, David, and Kieran. The four of us ate Doritos and played Call of Duty all night. My parents' bedroom was 3 floors above us, so we didn't have to worry much about keeping the noise down. We were messing around on my dad's rowing machine sometime just before 2 when we heard a sharp knock at the storm door. The sound instantly silenced us. Who the hell would knock on the storm door? It had to be someone who either didn't want to wake my parents up or knew we were down there. Or both. It didn't make sense. The person kept knocking in the same rhythmic pattern. I could tell Kieran was about to say something, and I couldn't stop him in time. In a loud and assertive voice, he asked who was there. I wanted to knock him out. He had basically broadcasted to whoever was out there that we were down there. My basement doesn't have any external windows, so it was unlikely they had known we were down there. But now they did. After a long pause and no more knocking, a muffled voice answered back. He said, "Come around to the back door," in a high-pitched voice that genuinely sounded cheerful, like he was a friend of ours trying to join the sleepover. It was definitely a teenager's voice too, and it didn't sound like someone pretending to raise their voice either. I was pretty scared, I can't lie. My friends were seemingly unfazed though, like they thought it was somehow exciting that some random kid was outside my house. They insisted that I at least check it out, and even though I didn't want to, they pressured me into it. We crept upstairs, careful not to make too much noise. I approached the back door slowly, trying to ignore the pounding in my chest. Through the narrow glass pane beside it, I could see a shadowy figure standing under the dim light. I got a little closer, and his face came into view, and my jaw nearly hit the floor when I realized who it was. It was him. It was that kid, Samuel Robinson III, who had signed my yearbook. My friends went to go open the door, God knows why, but I stopped them, saying I knew who it was. I explained to them what had happened, and that changed their mood a bit. Keep in mind, Sam was still standing outside while we were talking, and he could definitely see in at us. He must have noticed how freaked out I was, because he started motioning to the side of the house like he wanted me to go over to the window. You might be wondering why none of us were taking the situation more seriously. I honestly think it was because it wasn't like some older, strange man was harassing us. It was a kid from our own school. Still, I wasn't opening the door for him. Instead, I went over to my kitchen window and cracked it open just a tiny bit, and my friends followed me and stood a little off to the side. He walked over to the window, and I asked him what he wanted, telling him I recognized him from our yearbook. He said, "Oh, so you got my message," and introduced himself as Sam. Then he went on to say he always watched me from afar and that we could have been good friends. I agreed with him just so I wouldn't piss him off, but there was 0% chance I would ever have been friends with this kid under any circumstances. I didn't want to press him right away, but I had to know. So I asked him how he knew where I lived. He didn't respond, and I didn't know what to say. Before I could de-escalate the situation, David called him a creepy stalker and told him to piss off. Sam's smile disappeared. He tilted his head like he didn't understand what David had just said, and then, just as quickly, his expression twisted into something I can only describe as hatred. He went from passive and honestly kind of friendly to aggressive and angry. He started screaming things at me, how he hated my friends and thought we should all die, how my ex hated me, and random stuff he had no right knowing. He reached toward the window and tried to force it open, but I jammed it shut and locked it. He started snarling at the window and banging on it like an animal. He was 2 seconds away from shattering it. I'm telling you. We must have caused quite the commotion because my parents came rushing down the stairs demanding to know why we had woken them up. And that's when Sam ran away. I told my parents what happened as quickly as I could, and my dad raced outside in his underwear. He came back a few minutes later saying he had no idea where the kid went. I'm not sure why, but my parents didn't call the police. They just told us to go back to sleep and that they'd deal with the school the following morning, just to give the kid the benefit of the doubt. The next morning they contacted the school, and that's when we learned the disturbing truth. Sam had been expelled a few weeks before the year finished, and he shouldn't have ever been at the school on the last day. Apparently, the yearbooks were printed before his expulsion, which explained why his picture was still included. That meant he had snuck into the school somehow just to write me that message, which freaked me out beyond belief. Despite working with the school to find out more, nobody could track Sam down. It was like he and his parents didn't exist. The whole thing was a pretty big deal, but the school did what they could to keep things under wraps. To this day, I still have no idea how he knew where I lived, and that's what freaks me out the most. The running theory is that he was a mentally challenged and troubled young boy who took a strange liking to me for whatever reason and then stalked me for who knows how long. My parents were worried for weeks. It's something we don't talk about anymore because it's just uncomfortable. But living in that same house has never felt the same ever since. Sven and the fire alarm. When I was in the 7th grade, there was this kid named Sven in my homeroom. To put it mildly, he was a bit strange. He was one of those kids who didn't socialize with anyone else, even though people frequently tried to include him in things. I didn't have all my classes with him, but from what I remember, he would always sit in the same spot in every room, the back corner opposite the door. Without fail, he'd show up to school in the exact same outfit every day, cargo shorts and an oversized burgundy hoodie. He obviously didn't talk much, but when he did have to answer a question or read a passage, he had a really deep voice that lots of other kids made fun of him for. I don't recall him having any friends at all, which made sense. This one time, my friend Tyler caught him slicing worms during recess, which I'm pretty sure he ended up getting detention for. Speaking of recess, Sven would spend the whole period by himself next to the fence that bordered the woods. He never played any games or did anything even remotely kid-centric. He'd just stand next to that fence doing God knows what. Some of my friends claim to have seen him talking to someone on the other side, but I've personally never seen that, so I'm not going to spread potential lies. I'm trying to think of other things about him worth mentioning. He had several quirks and other weird habits typical of any strange middle schooler, but none relevant to the story I'm going to tell. This happened on the last day of school. I went to a pretty big middle school with lots of kids per grade, meaning there were a ton of concurring classes with students from the same year happening at all times. Because of that, there was this last day tradition where students from the same year would sneak into and sit in random classrooms to try and mess with the teachers. I'm pretty sure the teachers were privy to this and played along to amuse the kids, but that's neither here nor there. I don't remember the exact time this happened, but I do remember I was in one of the few classes I shared with Sven. Everything was exactly as it had been all day. The entire class was mixed up with random students who were supposed to be elsewhere. I was kind of a stickler for rules growing up. That's just how I was raised, so I never participated in any of the tomfoolery. My friends all did though, so I was often alone in all my classes since they went to other rooms together. This was one of those times. All my friends had left the room, and the only kid I knew even a little, coincidentally, was Sven. Sven was acting stranger than usual that day. That's something I remember distinctly. I can't fully remember what we were learning or doing in class, but I do remember that Sven was tapping his foot pretty aggressively, something he never did. He was also constantly looking around the room, as if searching for someone or trying to keep tabs on someone. I don't think he was watching me, but I couldn't be sure. The other thing I remember was that there were a lot more kids in the class I didn't recognize. Granted, one or two wasn't anything out of the ordinary since everything was switched around, but the odds that there were so many students I had never even seen before were slim. At some point, the teacher, I'm pretty sure her name was Ms. Bell, told us to get into groups of 3 or 4 to work on some kind of end-of-year reflection worksheet. Nothing serious. Most kids just used it as an excuse to talk and mess around. At one point, Ms. Bell walked over to her desk, picked up the classroom phone, and turned her back to us. A few minutes later, another teacher showed up, I think from the room next door. They stepped just outside the classroom door and started whispering. It wasn't a long conversation, maybe half a minute, but something about it felt off, like they were trying not to cause a scene. I could tell something was up. Ms. Bell looked uneasy. That's honestly the best way I can describe her demeanor. After they finished talking, Ms. Bell and the other teacher came back into the room. They didn't say anything to the class. They just walked over to a few specific kids and knelt down beside their desks. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but whatever it was quiet, clearly like they didn't want the rest of us to notice. A minute later, those same kids got up and followed the teachers into the hallway. No one really reacted. I felt like I was the only one who even noticed what was going on. Ms. Bell came back a few minutes later, alone this time. She didn't say anything about the kids who left, just sat back down at her desk and started shuffling papers like nothing had happened. But right after she did, the fire alarm went off. Ms. Bell didn't really react, like she knew it was going to happen. She told us to line up and head outside, and we joined the rest of the school out by the field behind the building. As usual, everyone was grouped by homeroom, so I ended up standing with a bunch of familiar faces again. But while we were all standing there, I looked back at the school for no reason, just out of habit I guess, and I could have sworn I saw something move in one of the second-story windows. It was quick, and maybe it was just a reflection or a shadow or something, but it felt wrong. The school was supposed to be completely empty. I kept it to myself, but I was really scared when it came to re-entering the building. We never went back inside, though. Before the alarm even stopped ringing, we started hearing sirens, and a few minutes later, police cars started pulling into the lot. Not just 1 or 2, but a whole line of them. They didn't waste time either. Officers jumped out and rushed straight into the building. No one explained anything. Teachers just told us to stay calm and wait. After a while, someone came around and said school was being let out early. No buses, we had to call our parents. We were never told what actually happened. My parents ended up telling me what the school had told them. They said a bunch of kids who didn't even go to our school had somehow gotten in. A rumor went around that they were planning to set the place on fire. Apparently, Ms. Bell had discovered some very alarming tools in one of the kids' backpacks, and the school tried flushing everyone out with the fire drill. The details are still a bit fuzzy, so I'm hoping I'm explaining everything properly. The part that really stuck with me was what my mom said at the end, that the kids had been let in by Sven through the side fence during recess. The whole thing was so bizarre, it's still difficult to process even now. I never saw Sven again. The homeless man. My friend Garrett is a little unhinged, and when I say a little, I mean a lot. He's one of those guys who goes around boasting about how crazy and aggressive he is like it's cool or something. He's constantly getting into fights, doesn't know how to keep his mouth shut, and spends more time in the gym than anywhere else, including his own house. There are actually 5 stories about him I could choose to tell, but the scariest one by far is the one you're about to hear. It also directly involves me, and I feel much more comfortable telling my own story rather than someone else's. This happened a couple of weeks ago, which was also coincidentally the last day of senior year, May 2019. The graduation ceremony wasn't scheduled for a few days, so even though we were done, we still had to stick around. It's tradition for all the graduating seniors to get plastered on the last day of classes, so that's exactly what we did. There is this huge clock tower in the center of campus where all the seniors convene to get drunk, which is exactly where we were at 10 p.m. It was packed. There were over 1,000 people crammed into that one courtyard. It was bittersweet, for me at least, but I think everyone was relieved after having finished finals, which are pretty tough at my school. There are a handful of other senior traditions I could tell you about, but I'm going to try to keep things succinct. There were 6 of us: me, C, T, R, N, and obviously Garrett. I don't think the rest of my friends would be comfortable with their names out there, so I'm just calling them by their initials. I should also quickly mention that we lived off campus, meaning we had to walk through the city to get home. There are a decent amount of homeless people in that city, so it's not rare to encounter some of them late at night. Anyway, we were heading back home from the clock tower when Garrett did some Garrett stuff. Well, it wasn't really his fault, but that's neither here nor there. As we were crossing the street, some random homeless guy ran up to our group and started tweaking. Usually, the homeless people around here keep to themselves since they're all tripping on drugs and don't notice their own surroundings. But this guy clearly wanted to engage. He was just standing in the middle of the crosswalk yelling things at us like he was a bridge troll protecting the other side of the street. We laughed a little and started walking in a wide semicircle around him since we didn't want to piss him off or antagonize him, everyone but Garrett, that is. Instead of disengaging, Garrett started yelling things back at the guy, telling him to get the F out of the street and to stop harassing strangers. The tweaker didn't like that and took a few aggressive steps toward him. That's when the rest of us jumped in to prevent an altercation from happening. We must have intimidated the tweaker because he stopped charging and went back to just yelling. I pulled Garrett out of the street trying to get him to behave, but he pushed my hand away. Before any of us could do anything, he charged full speed at the tweaker and screamed, "I'm fucking crazy!" The tweaker started running away, which caused Garrett to stop charging and start laughing. I know it's bad, but the scene was genuinely funny, as messed up as it was. It was like running full speed into a flock of birds and watching them scatter. We started walking toward our house after that, but after a few minutes, we realized the tweaker was following us. When he caught us looking back at him, he started yelling things about how we had made a big mistake and how he was going to, quote, call a niche, whatever that meant. We started heckling the guy back, hoping he'd get scared and leave, but I'm pretty sure we only intensified whatever tantrum he was having. Look, I'm not proud of everything that happened that night, but we were about to graduate from a very prestigious university and had been celebrating all night with alcohol, so we weren't in the right headspace to properly evaluate the situation. About a block away from our house, we realized the guy was still following us, albeit a little farther back now. I told the rest of the guys I didn't feel comfortable leading him to our house, and the others agreed. But naturally, Garrett took off toward the homeless guy before the group could come to a consensus. He again started sprinting at the guy, who once again fled in the opposite direction. Garrett turned and jogged back toward us, and we all jogged up the street. We thought that was it. We made it back to our house, pretty confident we hadn't been followed that time. I'm not even going to go into what we did back at the houselets. Just say it was a level of degeneracy I won't be approaching anytime soon. I can't even tell you what time it was. I was stumbling out of the front door to pick up my DoorDash when I noticed something odd. The side gate that led into our backyard was wide open. It was especially weird because we used this little strand of twine to keep it shut, so the door being open meant that someone had deliberately undone it. I instantly made the connection. It was probably that guy from earlier. I had enough sense to connect the dots, but I guess I didn't have enough sense to react accordingly. The smart thing would have been to alert my friends, but my drunken self decided to investigate. I put the DoorDash on the porch and went around the house, trying my best to walk straight. I turned the corner into the backyard, and before I could even see, I felt a rope around my throat. I flailed around wildly, but it was no use. Someone was strangling me from behind, and there was nothing I could do about it. I felt the rope's frayed ends digging into my throat as he tightened it with all his strength. I genuinely thought I was going to die. With all my might, I swung my legs backward and he lost his footing. The two of us hit the ground and I could breathe again, but he was still on top of me. In a fit of rage, he clawed at my face and I could feel blood streaming down my cheeks. I threw him off of me and he got to his feet before running out of sight. I'll try and keep things short from here on out. I ended up having to go to the hospital that night. The cuts weren't bad, but I needed a bunch of shots to protect me against any kind of diseases the guy might have had. The police were less than helpful, and since I was moving out a week later, there wasn't much I could do either. The worst part about the whole thing was that I had visible cuts in all my grad photos. Garrett felt so bad he ended up taking me to Nobu, but I never held anything against him. I just hope he's learned his lesson about not antagonizing people who have nothing to lose. The garage incident. This story happened about 10 years ago. I grew up in a small house, and for most of my childhood, I shared a bedroom with my older brother. We had 2 twin beds on opposite sides of the room, 2 dressers and 2 closets. There wasn't even enough space for a desk. It wasn't exactly cramped, but it wasn't comfortable either. So when my brother went away to college, I immediately moved his bed out of the room and took over the space with his permission, of course. I was finally at the age where a desk was necessary, and it was nice not having to do homework in the basement or in my dad's office. That setup worked perfectly for the 2 years before I went off to college myself. After graduating, my brother got a city job near our hometown, so he moved back into our parents' house, and the first thing he did was reclaim the bedroom I had redesigned. I was irritated at first, but my parents pointed out that I had done the same thing to him before, so it was only fair. I couldn't argue with that. Later, when I got a city job too, I also decided to move back home, but since my old room was taken, I had to settle for the upstairs guest bedroom. It was half the size of my old one, but would have to do. The guest room was next to my dad's office, directly above the garage. So every time someone opened the garage door, the floor would vibrate for about 10 seconds. The room slightly overhung the corner of the house, with 2 windows, one facing the driveway and the other overlooking the side yard. It wasn't ideal, but it was quiet and private most of the time. This particular incident happened on a Friday evening when I was home alone. My brother was in Baltimore for a work conference, and my parents were at our family's shore house for the weekend. After a long, exhausting day at work, I decided to stay in, order food, and call it an early night. Around 11:30, I was lying in bed reading a book when I heard the unmistakable sound of the garage door rising, followed by the familiar vibration through the floor. It took a moment for it to sink in. No one in my family was supposed to be home. My parents had said they'd be at the shore until Sunday night, and my brother wouldn't return until Saturday afternoon. When the realization hit, my heart started racing. I jumped out of bed and looked out the window toward the driveway, but it was too dark to see clearly. The garage door was open, but I couldn't tell if there was a car or anyone there. Without thinking, I grabbed an old baseball bat from the closet and began to creep downstairs. I tried to calm myself by thinking there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe my parents forgot something and came back, or my brother's plans changed, or maybe the door had just glitched open. But as I reached the bottom of the stairs, before turning the corner into the main part of the house, I heard faint voices coming from the other side, where all the bedrooms were. They were too quiet to make out, but it was clear there were at least 2 people talking. That's when I knew for certain someone had broken into the house. I pulled out my phone, dialed 911, whispered my address, and told the operator that there were intruders in my home. I kept the line open and slipped the phone back into my pocket, just like they instruct you to do. The operator told me to stay put and not to announce my presence, but I felt this overwhelming urge to defend my house, as if compelled by some invisible force to act rather than hide and wait. So, against the operator's instruction, I decided that's exactly what I was going to do. I crept down the hallway toward the voices, clutching the baseball bat as tightly as I could. As I got closer to my parents' bedroom, I could hear drawers opening and things being moved around. They were clearly searching for something valuable. I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to do was probably stupid, but unable to stop myself. I started yelling as loudly as I could to catch them off guard and charged into the room with the bat raised above my head. There were two men rummaging through my mother's closet, and they both shouted in shock when I burst through the door. They hadn't expected anyone to be home, let alone someone willing to fight back. That gave me confidence, despite being outnumbered and uncertain if they had weapons. I swung the bat at the closer man, hitting his leg. He cursed and stumbled before falling. I turned to the other, but before I could swing again, he dropped his shoulder and tackled me. We hit the ground hard, and I realized immediately he was much larger and stronger than me. He wrestled the bat from my hands and grabbed my throat, choking me. I clawed at his hands, fighting for my life, when I saw the first guy crawling toward us with something in his hand that looked like a knife. In that instant, I realized I'd made a grave mistake, a mistake that might cost me my life. I genuinely thought those were my final moments, and all I could think about was how devastated my mom would be when she found out. But then, faintly in the background, I heard the sound of police sirens approaching. The last thing I remember was the second guy picking up the bat and swinging it at my head. Everything went black. When I woke up, someone was shaking me gently. I opened my eyes to see a police officer kneeling beside me, asking if I was okay. I was dazed and confused, taking several seconds to remember what had happened. The door leading from my parents' bedroom to the backyard was wide open. The intruders had knocked me out and fled when they heard the sirens. The officer told me to stay put and not move in case I was concussed. I had a raging headache, but I was conscious and coherent. Once paramedics confirmed I was stable, I refused to go to the hospital despite their recommendations. I gave the officers a detailed account of what happened. They said they were searching the neighborhood, but by the time they arrived, the men were long gone. After the investigation, I called my parents and brother to tell them what happened. My parents yelled at me for confronting the burglars, and I deserved it. Had I hidden instead, the police might have caught them. The men were never found, despite the search. My parents installed a full security system, cameras, motion sensors, lights, everything, right after returning from the shore house. But something kept bothering me. All the doors had been locked that night, and the only way to open the garage door was through a small wireless button in my car that my dad had programmed. There was no way a stranger could have known about it. Whoever broke in knew my family well enough to know exactly where that button was, and that I never locked my car when it sat in the driveway. Even more unsettling was the timing. They somehow knew my parents would be gone for the weekend and that my brother was out of town. I don't live in that house anymore, but my parents never found out who had broken in. The whole thing made my dad paranoid for a long time, convinced that whoever did it was close to the family. I'm not going to say that night changed me forever or anything cliché like that, but I will say this life before and after you've accepted you're going to die are two very different things. I can still remember that moment, that hollow, detached feeling when I thought it was the end. Nothing else has ever felt like that since.